our learning objectives are to differentiate observable markers of avoidance, shutdown, and resistance, recognize protective mechanisms without pathologizing our clients, and implement brief somatic and relational interventions to restore momentum, or in a lot of cases, just store relationship. So traditionally, a lot of us were taught, push through cognitive pieces from CBT, reframe, challenge it, all of those things. The goal there is to actively break down barriers to expedite the change. However, the reality is the nervous system science reveals that avoidance and shutdown are automatic survival responses. It is the system that is overwhelmed, and so we respond with co-regulation rather than the cognitive overrides. I think this is also really important because it's very easy for therapists to collude with our clients in intellectualization. And this happens a lot when we're trying to push past and going for more cognitive interventions. All right, so our 3 stuck states. Just so we all know what we're talking about, this is how I broke them down. So if you break them down differently, it's up to you. But avoidance, I say, is the behavioral or cognitive strategies designed to escape anxiety-provoking stimuli while maintaining relational contact. This person is actively engaged. They're just really protecting themselves. You'll see sudden topic switching, intellectualization, humor, over-explaining, or frequent late cancellations, very common. For shutdown, this is the automatic response to perceived unavoidable threat or intense internal overwhelm. The observable markers are flat affect, sudden dropping of gaze, monotone or quiet, I don't know responses, physical collapse, and full-blown client going catatonic in front of you. The first time this happened to me, I was a very young therapist, and I legitimately thought that I killed my client with therapy. I was like full-blown panicking because I couldn't, like, she was completely unresponsive to me. She's alive and well. I still work with her, actually. But it was quite the moment. The key distinction here, it is not active disengagement or refusal. And I've seen people think this is like, oh, they're just ignoring me. They're not paying attention to me. No, that's not it. They're just in full somatic protection, somatic cognitive emotional protection mode. With resistance is a clinical pattern where change threatens internal system stability, safety, or secondary gains. The markers here, you're looking at goal direction mismatch, persistent yes but responses, relational guardedness. Something that I see a lot here is questioning therapists' expertise or questioning therapy in general. This doesn't work for me. Does this work for me? I don't know if this works for me. Obviously, like, important for us to have those conversations with our clients if that's what they're feeling. But with clients who are resistant, this is a common conversation that's like coming up every other second. Megan, do you have something to say?
I do. I was just wondering if in the chat people could put, of these 3, avoidance, shutdown, and resistance, because everyone's different, what is the hardest for them to sit with? And then Rachel, for you, what is the hardest of avoidance, shutdown, and resistance?
Great questions. I would say resistance because, and I think resistance also is the one that triggers imposter syndrome the most, just given that you will have clients questioning you or questioning therapy. And for me, that's like, oh, did I do this right? Is this a good fit? Like, what's going on here? And so I I think resistance would definitely be the hardest one for me just because of how it triggers my own imposter syndrome.
Definitely a wide
Yes.
range of responses here. And I think that probably says a lot about what we can handle as the clinician.
Yeah. This is a great plug for Adam McCormick's book, who did a training for Agents of Change not long ago. You'll learn all about why that's the hardest for you. So, um, just a quick little plug. So we've already talked about this a little bit, but just drawing your attention to the immediate clinical need in the therapist state. So the adaptive mechanism is for avoidance is anxiety reduction. So we're pulling back, more pacing, gradual exposure. This is where the therapist needs to calm down and take a step back. Because if we're getting into that avoidance, it means we're hitting something that the client probably is not ready for. With shutdown, it's a full-blown threat defense. They need somatic safety and nervous system co-regulation. Client shutdown can lead to a lot of therapist anxiety. We also tend to outwork our clients in these moments, or we start to withdraw ourselves. So I literally had a client today go into a shutdown response, and I've been with this client for a very long time. So, we have a plan in place for when this happens. So part of that plan is I ask her, like, I'll say, like, I'm going to touch your hand, and then I'll hold her hand and she'll like squeeze my hand, and I'll continuously talk to her until she is able to like verbally come back and speak with me. I would never touch a client unless they were like physically going to harm themselves. I would never touch a client without having that established first, because that touch is so jarring. And a lot of times, especially with trauma, touch is involved. So for resistance, trying to protect their autonomy. I always think of teens here. They are they can be very resistant, but they can also be very fun. So a lot of validation, collaboration, shared agency. With my more resistant clients, I will ask, like, hey, can you send me a list before therapy of like the 3 things we're going to hit on today or whatever. And then it's like an agreement. Like they have told me what we're going to work on. And that then is on my computer, it's written down, and we have a better chance of like actually going through that. And, we can also then talk about why the resistance is there. Therapist frustration is a really normal response to this because it can feel like the client is just doing it on purpose. So normal. So we've talked about this a little bit. Our cognitive escapes that we'll see: active redirection of deep themes. Clients discuss details surrounding emotional events, but it sounds like they're reading a newspaper. For somatic deficit, the nervous system downregulation is marked by a flat affect, a poor eye tracking, slow processing speeds. This is where the dorsal dive comes in, where people completely stop responding to you. And this can look like people might go to sleep. Had that happen before. For relational probing, we're looking for like where are the boundaries. This is where clients are going to test the boundaries, especially if we're talking in resistance. There could be some like pushing just to see what's going to happen, because there hasn't been a strong enough relational foundation at that point, if we're running into that much resistance. And so you'll get a lot of overt opposition, lots of defensiveness. All of these are defense mechanisms, but it's a little bit more abrupt. So reframing our defensive mechanisms: protective dissociation. When somebody dissociates, it's to protect themselves. They are outside of their window of tolerance. They are not able to access all the other parts of their brain. I think of this too as like the memory is still there, and the memory feels like it's happening all the time with trauma. And if we're starting to get nearer to that or talk about that, and the client is no longer avoiding that, that dissociation comes in pretty heavily because they don't want to go back there. And it feels like it's happening right now. And they don't want it to happen right now either. So just shuts down. And I think in these cases, the self is very fragile. Who are they? Where are they? All of those things come into play when somebody's dissociated. They may have no idea what's going on around them. They may not even know who you are at times if they're like really struggling with that. Um, Healthy ambivalence, the yes but responses. I like to think of those as the client is pacing themselves. Um, they are telling you how much they can handle. um, and I think that it can be like that. Those can also be really hard questions after a while where it's like, or statements just like, I'm tired of this. Like, I'm tired. As a therapist, I'm tired of answering the yes buts. But I think that it's like if we can reframe that and think of that as, oh, this person is pacing themselves, um, that gives us a different window. And I think that also helps us ask different questions in that moment. I'm going to spend a little time on the dorsal vagal state. This could be an entire training in and of itself. Um, so the uh, understanding hypoarousal, so that would be the dorsal dive that I talked about earlier, or complete shutdown. It's the body's ultimate survival mechanism to overwhelming threat or stress that feels impossible to fight or escape. It occurs when the oldest pathways of the vagus nerve takes over, pulling the emergency brake. It is conserving energy, numbing pain. It is the freeze. So whatever order you want to go into, but a lot of times how I explain it to clients is like, first we flight, we try to flee, we run. First is flight. We can't get away. So then we fight. We can't fight it off. So then we freeze. And as I'm sure many of you know, the fight and flight part is, there's a lot going on there. People will say there's different other ones to be added into that, which is fine, but I'm not going to go into all of that today. But when fight and flight are not possible, we freeze. And this is where we end up. It feels internally, they say profound numbness, detachment, and mental fog. I hear heavy limbs as well. Like I'll have people say, like, I feel like my legs are really heavy, or I feel like my arms are really heavy. Externally, it's that flat affect, slow speech, physical collapse, all those things. And I think this one is important because it's not laziness or stubbornness or a refusal to participate. It's involuntary. It is a biological reflex. It is the system saying, no, we've had enough, and shutting down. It is protective. And I have had very, very seasoned clinicians talk about how their clients were so just avoidant, or they were ignoring them the entire time they were in session, and blah, 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 blah. And turns out they were dissociating. But those clinicians were also not trained in what that looks like. Makes a difference. So our nervous system states, again, this could be a whole training in and of itself. When therapy feels stalled, our immediate instinct as clinicians is often to re-examine intervention, or push harder, or try to figure out what's the next thing to do. And that's not always the answer. Cognitive work cannot happen without safety. We need safety in order to process anything. Megan.
Sorry, I was muted. Alex has some really, really good questions that are coming up. I love how engaged everyone is, but I saw a few themes come up. What would this, I know that you said it can be very jarring to see dissociation in the therapy room. What might it look like? And how do, as a clinician, do we regulate ourselves when we see this?
It's a great question. Um, yeah, so it can look like many, many things. It can look like your client's just staring off into space. It can look like they're just staring at their lap. It can be, as unintrusive, more or less, as, just not responding to questions, or responding very slowly, or responding in ways that don't necessarily make sense to what you asked. Um, where it gets really jarring is where people shut down, and literally their entire system's shut down. Their heart rate is slowing. Everything is slowing down. They are conserving as much energy as possible. And that can be incredibly jarring when you're having a conversation and all of a sudden somebody is like not there anymore. Physically, they're there, but they are not there. The other time I think it's very jarring is when we're looking at dissociative identity disorder, and it does not look like what the movies and all of those things portray it. But it is jarring to also all of a sudden be essentially speaking to a child or speaking to a teenager that is when the person in front of you is in their 60s. And so there's a lot of therapist the therapist has to be really on top of it and be able to jump from thing to thing. Um, as far as our own regulation, I think that that's one of the more difficult things and one of the things we get better at with time. I remember one of the first times I had somebody do a dorsal dive. Um, I was I was standing next to them, touching their shoulder as like our safety plan had stated, and all of a sudden my Apple Watch went off and was like, "Congratulations, you closed your move ring today." And like when I had started, I was like nowhere even close to closing my move ring. But apparently my heart rate was so high that Apple Watch thought that I was exercising. But it was a good notice to me to be like, oh wait, I'm really activated. And so I started trying to slow my own breathing. I grabbed one of my squishy toys from wherever I was and just, continued to stand there and touch her as we had agreed and play with my squishy toy. Um, but it's hard. It's really hard. It's also exhausting. It can take hours sometimes for people to come back out of it. And if they're in your therapy room, they're not going anywhere. And now you're here with them. And it's exhausting. It is truly an exhausting process to essentially co-regulate someone back from complete shutdown. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. That was really, really helpful. And I just want to preface this by Rachel is an absolute expert in trauma. And we're not just talking about, you have clients that come in and have experienced some, traumas that would be short-term interventions. Rachel really, really, really is an expert. And some of her clients she has been with for, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, like over a decade, right? So this is long-term work. And that's why she's talking about when she's with clients and walking alongside them. And they've been putting in the work for a very, very, very long time. And why I wanted to preface this is I actually think training programs, right, our master's programs don't really prepare us for these type of really, really, really intense cases. So I'm just thankful that you're sharing all this with us, Rachel, because it is such a hard, hard, hard place to be in with our clients.
Yeah, it really is. And, my master's program definitely did not prepare me for this. And my placement was actually in a trauma-based uh, agency, and I still was very unprepared. So looking at our primary nervous system states, um, to safely and effectively navigate treatment resistance, we have to assess. We need to notice where our client is at in their own window of tolerance, where their nervous system is at. This is all from the polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges. Very intense books, but a lot of good information. But once we can identify that, we can then figure out where we need to go. we can also figure out what might be getting in the way in those moments. So with the ventral vagal state, that is your window of tolerance. You're open, you're connected. This is where prime emotional processing happens. That's where we want everybody to be. That's where we always want to be. Um, and this is where we go for it. When a client is in this state and they are ready and we are ready and all of those things, that's when we start processing. For the sympathetic state, this is your mobilization. So in the therapy room, because this would be like theoretically our fight or flight or those things, in the therapy room, this manifests usually as avoidance, anxiety, cognitive flight, which changing the subject, making jokes, talking about anything and everything else, and intellectualizing and getting defensive. Because again, they're not able to, I mean, I guess they could get up and run. And I've had kids do that. But generally speaking, I've also had kids get up and try to fight. But generally speaking, this is going to look like that avoidance and anxiety coming up because they feel the need to run. This is an active attempt for escape. So we know they're overwhelmed. So interventions, we want that to be down. We're trying to down regulate. We're titrating the material into smaller doses. We're really establishing a containment strategy. And this is where we use micro interventions, which I'll talk about later. And then finally, immobilization. So as we've talked about, this is the emergency brake. And so therapist strategy is passive co-regulation, lowering the cognitive demand and gentle somatic grounding. We're trying to bring the system back into a window of safety. And this is so biological that it really does take a lot of grounding and a lot of like somatic interventions and slow somatic interventions. The brain is not online. That frontal lobe is gone. So we are dealing with a very scared system, and it takes a while to bring everything back online. And so a lot of times it means that we are doing so much regulating in those moments, just slow and steady. And again, it can be exhausting. So matching your intervention to the client's nervous system state is the difference between therapeutic momentum and therapeutic rupture. Never ask a dorsal vagal system to perform a ventral vagal task. It's very important. This is one of my favorite things ever, the principle of pacing. I think this also could be a training in and of itself. So we tend to want to move quickly. Ron Kurtz and Peter Levine have a quote from, I don't know which one of them said it, it's in one of their books. It said, fast is the pace of the ego in defense, slow is the pace of the nervous system in deep integration. And I love that quote. I think it's just really powerful and speaks exactly to what we're trying to do. The other day I saw a post on, I don't even remember, Instagram somewhere. And it said, I really wish I was the therapist insurance companies think I am. And then somebody else underneath it said, commented, carry yourself into sessions with the confidence of a 6 to 12 session insurance plan. And I thought it was very funny because not a lot of things happen in 6 to 12 sessions. And I wish I was that much of a miracle worker, but I am not. And with trauma, you're not going to get anywhere in 6 to 12 sessions. Like you might establish some rapport and safety, but that's about it. So we're slowing down. I have never regretted slowing down. I have never regretted using titration. I have regretted going too fast, and that does not end well. And I'll have clients be like, didn't we already do this? Like, yeah, maybe we did, but like, we're going to go over this particular thing again because I really want to make sure that like it is in there. And especially with like EMDR or some other modalities where we really want to instill whatever we are working on or talking about, or really process it. So titration involves the micro doses of emotional challenge. So again, where our micro interventions come in, followed immediately by restorative co-regulation, maintaining engagement safely within the window of tolerance. So really big things here were micro dosing, micro interventions, and then we have to be ready as clinicians to co-regulate. We have to be regulated enough to co-regulate because that in the moment, that is our job. That is how we establish safety. If we're all over the place, our client is not going to come back into that space. Their window of tolerance is not going to show up again if as a therapist we're kind of like ah. So as we all know, but working with these things can also really trigger that part of us. So maintaining the engagement within the window of tolerance is also can be really tricky. And this is where, the more you work with someone, the better you get to know them and the better you get to know what they need and how to interact in some of those ways. But maintaining that safety, particularly when a client has like gone back into their trauma and they're feeling it everywhere in their body and everything is on fire, is really hard. Are you safe? Is your office safe? I hope so. But they do not feel that in the moment. And so that, like, this is where like some really hard work comes in, both cognitively and somatically for the therapist. Alex.
Yeah, Rachel, I think there was a good question in the chat from earlier that's kind of related to this topic. And someone wanted to know, like, if you had any suggestions for clients that state something along the lines of, something happened to me recently, but I'm not going to tell you, or I don't want to tell you what's bothering me. So, kind of they're remaining guarded, but they're releasing a little bit of information to you. So how would you kind of handle that in this context?
Yeah, I've had this happen. Usually what I say is you do not need to tell me what happened. You don't have to tell me the details. You don't have to tell me what's going on, but can you tell me how you feel? Can you tell me how you feel in your body? Do you need the emotions wheel to pick out the feeling? But just again, this is slow. And sometimes people will be like, no, I'm not going to tell you what I'm feeling because that's going to be too much. It's like, all right. All right, we'll get there when we get there. But I think a big part of it is just coming back in those moments to the somatic, especially if they're like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't need you to talk about it to work with the emotion. Is talking about it really helpful? Yeah. But can we do this other thing? Yes, we can. And sometimes like if they're like, I don't even know what I'm feeling, I'll ask them like, what color is it? Well, if we were in this room, where would it be? And usually they think this is ridiculous and stupid, but they'll answer my questions. And then it actually helps get the ball rolling a little bit. So sometimes it takes ridiculous questions to get to the best answer.
Rachel, I just want to jump in. I like to call that flirting with vulnerability. They're not ready to fully go there, but they're trying to, I also think, feel out if it's a safe place or trying to push the limits a little bit.
I love that flirting with vulnerability. I might steal that. I'll give you credit if I write it down somewhere. But that's exactly it. We're flirting with vulnerability. Momentum and recovery flow. So this is just kind of like basically an overview of what we've talked about thus far. So observable visceral markers. We're looking at the face, tone, vocal patterns, identify that nervous system state. Where is this person? that nervous system state may be different every single time the person walks into your office. So there's always assessment. We are never done assessing. So co-regulate, this could look different for different people. But I went for in more of a trauma response. You're softening your posture, you're checking in on your breathing. You are also making sure that you're in a stable and secure environment with your client when they walk in to your office. You want to be able to be that safe place. And so really regulating that and knowing where you're at before they walk in is really important. I think particularly I had a client who would come in like super like and I used to try to like just be like, it's fine, like talk really quietly and all of that. And then I realized that they actually needed me to get angry with them when they walked in. And so when they walked in, I essentially like we co-regulated in a different way. I went up to meet them and we talked about, yeah, like that sucks. That's horrible. Blah, 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 blah. And then slowly but surely, as all the stuff got out, we were able to bring it back down into a processing place, and like deactivate some of that anger or frustration or excitement, whatever it may be. So yes, you want to be, soft and safe and all of those things, but sometimes being safe, particularly with teenagers, might mean that like you're also getting hyped up with them and then bringing them down with you. It's going to get someone and bring them back is how I view that. Process, trying to move from content to the process. I think this is really hard, particularly for avoidant and resistant clients, because content feels safe. Content is intellectual. Content, they can talk about it and not feel it. Content that's where they want to stay. So moving from content to process and moving from content to emotion is where a lot of these things get really tricky and where you do find quite a bit of resistance and avoidance. And so, again, we're bringing it back, naming it. I like how they say respectfully name the block, without judgment. I think that's important. However, with some of my clients who I've been with for a long time, I'm a little more blunt. And I'll just be like, hey, you're avoiding my question, or hey, you're not with me here. Like, we're not on the same page right now. And with those clients that works because I've been with them long enough to be able to do that. But also for some clients, they need a little bit more direct calling on that of like, hey, yeah, this is not what we're doing in here, and letting them know that you see it, which I think is also really important because, again, if they're testing the safety, if they're flirting with that vulnerability, you naming it is a really powerful thing because it also shows them that you are paying attention, you are noticing. So that's the process piece. Titration, micro challenges, protecting our clinical boundaries, and rebuild safe momentum. So this is again where we're going slow. And I think titrate and process should probably just be one on this momentum recovery flow. But there is a big part of, okay, when we're done with the session where we have done all of these things, or we have been met with resistance or avoidance or shutdown, how do we send our client back out into the world? Because we don't want to just open the door, be like, see you next week. Hope you're fine. We just brought up all sorts of horrible things, but that's okay. So also titrating down and out of the session is really important. This is where the containment exercises can be helpful. taking a minute to switch topics and think about other things, whatever it may be. Titrating in the process and titrating after the process and titrating into the process, all really important. Go slow to go fast. So just a couple practical interventions that I wanted to talk about. And this is where micro interventions come in. Micro interventions were first introduced by Dr. Stu. He was talking about micro interventions to microaggressions, particularly with bias and racism. And then I don't know who, but someone moved this more into the somatic world, in which a lot of his micro interventions were very somatic because of the fear or the response that people were having in their bodies in unsafe situations. And so not that big of a jump, but somebody did it. And expanded this more to psychotherapy. So in polyvagal theory, micro interventions are linked to titration. It is breaking down emotional or traumatic material into the smallest possible unit of experience so the nervous system doesn't shut down. This also might just be a touch, right? Like it might be the slightest thing, but that's a step further than where we were before. I had a client who envisioned a door, and behind the door was all the things she didn't want to think about, didn't want to go to, did not want to process, a lot of childhood abuse. And part of our process was building up safety for her to walk towards the door. The door was not real. It was a vision that we used, but it was incredibly helpful. And I think it also speaks to, she could shut the door. That was part of our containment, is she could shut the door after we were done. But it took us quite a few sessions to even like open the door or touch the door. But it was a really good example for me. I was, again, a pretty young clinician, but it was a very good teaching moment on how to break this down, how to go slowly, and also how to remember, like, you can be moving forward even if you feel like you're standing still. So Megan.
I just wanted to point out in the chat, I was just asking how many people was the term micro intervention new to them, and actually quite a bit of people. It was new to me. So thank you for bringing this term to our visibility. And a lot of people were saying, I do this, but I didn't know there was a term for it. So I love that you brought this up. And when did it kind of come into your vocabulary?
When did it? I don't know. I wrote about it recently in a paper on refugee trauma and OCD presentation. So it's a little more fresh in my head. But when I first heard about it, I don't know. Good question. But I love that. I love that people learned something new. And yes, I think that this is a big thing, that there's so many things that we already do. And there is a name for it, even if we don't know it. So love that. This is also a place where, like, you can call out the avoidance, and it can be a micro intervention. Just like, hey, I notice that we keep switching topics here. I notice that you get uncomfortable anytime I say this. And it doesn't have to be now we're going to go into it and talk about it. It's just like, I noticed that. And like drawing attention to like that one tiny thing. And then maybe you're moving on. Maybe you're then talking about how their kids are driving them crazy, or how their parents won't leave them alone, or whatever it may be. But naming the tiny thing in the moment. It doesn't have to be big. You don't have to jump in full force. Just, I noticed that. Did you notice that? One of the things too that actually, I'll get to that. Somatic microinterventions. So this is a lot of like that co-regulating and mirroring. So bilateral touch is always a good one. If possible, I'll throw a ball back and forth with clients, and I'll say like switch hands every time to kind of get some bilateral movement in. But it also like keeps them present because it's hard to go away when a ball is flying at your face. And so obviously they're very soft. They're not like throwing a basketball at anybody. But it's a very easy way to keep people in the space. And again, right, like it's a tiny thing. It is a tiny thing for grounding and regulating, throwing a ball back and forth, but it can be so helpful. And that's what we're after, right? Like you're not going to get anywhere in your process if your clients aren't grounded. If they are not regulated, you're not going anywhere. So yeah, maybe you're not necessarily jumping into deep trauma work that day. But if they feel safe and present in your office, that's a win. That's amazing. The more often that happens, the more often their brain is going to associate that. So maybe something as little as a change in your voice, or, you know, lighting a candle, whatever maybe. It might be really small. It might even be how you're sitting. But those little things, particularly somatically, are so important and make a huge difference. So with scaffolding, I love micro decisions because people have a really hard time making decisions. And so I'll be like, all right, we're going to break it down. And they'll be like, what do you mean? And we'll break it down more, break it down more, break it down more. And we'll like get down to like a teeny tiny thing. And they're like, oh yeah, like obviously like this. I'm like, all right, great. You made a decision. Awesome. We can get to the next step next week if we need to. But a lot of times that like gets some momentum where it's like, oh, okay, I made a tiny decision. I made another tiny decision. I made another tiny decision. The other thing that I do with this is my clients who are more resistant, I'll have them send me a list of what they want to talk about in therapy ahead of time. So when they come in, they have told me the list. I'm not dictating where we're going. They give me the list. I have the list. And so it's really hard to avoid that or resist that if, you know, you said this is what I want to talk about in therapy. Obviously, people will say like, no. I take it back. All right, we'll get there when we get there. But it can be incredibly helpful because they also have a lot of agency over what they're doing in therapy. And you know, they get to tell you what's going on, and that gives them a sense of agency and choice and all of those things in the therapy room. I think too, this is also really helpful with clients who have short-term, like have problems remembering their weeks. I'll have them like make a quick list or make a note on their phone of like, this thing happened. And that's really helpful when you're trying to get through some of these things. This is a quote from my paper on refugee trauma and OCD. Stuckness is not a failure of therapy, nor is it client willful defiance. It is a vital somatic message from the client's survival system, signaling that safety has been compromised. I think that that's what it comes down to. With all of these things, every single one of the resistance pieces, avoidance, shutdown, resistance, what it comes down to is safety. And yeah, people can approach that in a way that is really hard as a therapist to discuss, and people can also, you know, really push our buttons as therapists. And at the core, it's about safety. That's what they're after. They want to know if they're safe. They want to know if you're safe, if that space is safe. That is the baseline goal. And so, you know, I think that when people are resistant or when they are avoidant or shutting down, it is telling you something. And you might be like, I have no idea. Like, Where would they feel unsafe in here? Great question. Start asking questions to them. See what you find out. Like, what's going on here? I think this is particularly true and real with secondary gains because there's going to be a loss of something. And noting and honoring that loss is really important alongside that, like, yeah, it might actually feel incredibly unsafe for you to continue on in life without this secondary gain. That might feel really unsafe or, maybe just overwhelming or scary or whatever it may be. So I think just taking a step and really evaluating and asking yourself and your clients, like, what's going on here? Where's the safety? How can we create safety? Here are just some key references. Deb Dana, Janina Fisher, Pat Ogden, and Stephen Porges. All great books. They will be on the slides. And then I don't actually know what time it is. I think we have time for a couple questions.
Yeah, this is so great, Rachel. So thank you for taking us through this. As you were talking about the momentum recovery flow, I think at the end you mentioned containment exercises, and there was definitely a few folks in the chat who were curious to learn a little bit more about what those could be, what that may mean. So if you have any examples of those, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so containment can look so many different ways. A lot of people go visual, like I'm putting it in a basket, I'm closing the basket, I'm locking the basket, and I'm putting the basket on your shelf. And if any of these memories or thoughts come up while I'm out of here, I'm going to remember, no, I left that in the office, or that's in my locked box, wherever. It's definitely, you have to pick what works for the client. For both children and adult clients, I have a little box in my room. Actually, I have a little box and I have this plushie that's called a worry eater, and it has a little zipper. And you can stuff things in the worry eater's mouth. But sometimes we'll write down like what we talked about that day, like just a couple points, and then, put it in the worry eater's mouth and close it, put it in the box and lock it, and it stays there. Like that's where it's going to be. You can pick it back up when you come next week. But in the meantime, I'm holding that. I got it. You don't need to worry about it. And we do a lot of work around which is, using a lot of CBT around hey, how do you not think about this when you're not here? And that is a lot of redirecting your thoughts, noticing where your thoughts go, etc.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. I know we only have about 4 minutes left, so maybe one last question here. One person mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation, they have a client who just says kind of talking about the past kind of keeps them from progressing. So they're a little bit avoidant of just talk therapy in general. Are there ways you've approached that situation where just talk is maybe a little bit off the table and you have to come at it kind of in a different direction?
Yeah, so this is where I employ EMDR. I know not everybody's trained in it, but this is where I go for the EMDR because we don't have to talk about it. And there's specific scripts and interventions, particularly when people are skeptical of the talk part. That being said, I go back to you don't need to be EMDR trained to use somatic pieces. You don't have to be EMDR trained to ask them where they're feeling it in their body. You don't have to be EMDR trained to talk about the emotion or talk about the sensation instead of the past. I will also pull out art, music. I will pull out many different things to help process without going into the actual talking part. So that's what I would say. Go somatic, go creative. It's good.
I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or click the link in the description to purchase the course and earn your CE certificate. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You get unlimited access to more than 200 ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses and more than 20 live events each year for one low annual fee. We're always adding new and exciting courses. Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.